When my mother raised her glass and called me the family burden, I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I just turned to the door and said, Zian, you can come in now. And the room went silent. Loma had always felt like she didn't belong. In family pictures, she was the one standing at the edge, barely noticed. When her siblings got new jobs, her mother threw small parties. When they got married, there were gifts, songs, and prayers. But when Loma finished her degree quietly or achieved anything, it was met with silence, or worse, indifference. Even as a child, she was always the one forgotten at school pickup, the one wearing hand-me-downs, the one left behind. Her mother never hit her, but words can cut deeper. Why can't you be more like your sister? You're too sensitive. We're doing our best with what we have. But somehow, their best was never meant for her. So when one day she got a message from her mother saying, "You're invited to the family legacy dinner. Please be on time," Loma's chest tightened. Legacy? Since when did they see her as part of anything important? Still, she went. She arrived at the house wearing a simple dress. No makeup, just calm on the outside and questions on the inside. Everyone was already seated, laughing, chatting, passing drinks. Her brothers had brought their wives. Her sisters looked like models. And then there was her. No one asked how she'd been. No one hugged her long. She was the last to sit, the last to be served. But what hurt more than anything was how no one noticed her sadness. She wasn't angry, just tired. As the dinner went on, she smiled politely, nodded when spoken to, and kept her voice soft. But something inside her felt different that night, like she wasn't here to be accepted anymore. She was just here to see, one last time, if they'd even try to know the real her. And when her mother finally stood and said, "Tonight we honor the ones who've made us proud," Loma already knew her name wouldn't be called. She was used to it. She was the leftover daughter. But what none of them knew was that this would be the last time they'd see her like. The dinner began with warm lights and fake smiles. Plates clinked, people laughed, and everyone acted like they were happy. Loma sat quietly at the end of the table, listening, watching. Her sisters were talking about their jobs, their holidays, their husbands. Her brothers were making jokes, and the room was filled with noise, but none of it was for her. Still, she stayed calm. She was used to being invisible. After the main course, Loma reached into her bag and pulled out a small box. Inside was a handmade photo frame she had crafted herself. It held an old picture of the family, one of the few where everyone was smiling, even her. She had decorated the edges with small carvings, symbols of unity and love. It took her weeks to make. Quietly, she walked over to her mother and handed it to her with both hands. Her mother looked at the frame, then at Loma, and instead of a thank you, she gave a cold, sharp smile. She held the frame up and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "You're our soft-hearted burden, but we manage." For a moment, silence filled the room. Then, Loma's sisters burst into giggles. One whispered, "Classic Loma." Her aunt didn't say a word but slowly shook her head in disappointment. Her brothers avoided eye contact, and her father, he looked down at his plate, pretending not to hear anything. Loma felt something tighten in her chest. Her hands trembled, but she kept them on her lap. The frame was still in her mother's hands, but now it felt like a joke. The thing she made with love was being used to hurt her. Each laugh, each silence, each turned eye, it all added weight to the invisible pain she carried. She didn't speak. She didn't cry. She just smiled lightly, nodded, and sat back down. But inside, her heart was breaking in quiet pieces. No one defended her. No one said, "That wasn't fair." No one reached for her hand under the table. They acted like she should be grateful to even be there, as if her presence was a favor, not a right, as if love had to be earned, and she had never quite earned it. But in that moment, Loma wasn't just hurt, she was done. Because sometimes, the deepest silence is not weakness. It's the moment right before a person changes everything. Loma sat quietly at the table after the painful comment her mother had made. Everyone had gone back to eating and chatting, like nothing had happened. But inside her, something had changed. She was no longer waiting for their love or trying to earn their approval. She had done that for years and only ended up hurt. She wiped her hands slowly with the napkin, stood up calmly, and without saying a word to anyone, walked toward the front door. The room didn't even notice her at first. They were too busy talking, laughing, and ignoring her. She reached into her small purse and pulled out her phone. She typed one short message and hit send. "Come in." time. Just a few seconds later, there was a knock on the door. Everyone paused. The knock wasn't loud, but it felt strange, unexpected. Loma turned the handle and opened the door slowly, and there he was. A tall, calm man stepped in. He wore a simple dark coat, his posture confident but gentle. His presence filled the room, even before he said a word. No one had seen him before. He walked straight to Loma, smiled warmly, and kissed her softly on the forehead. Then he looked up at everyone in the room and said, "Sorry for being late, darling." The room went completely silent. Forks froze mid-air. Her sisters stared wide-eyed. Her aunt blinked in shock. Her father finally looked up from his plate. Even her mother, who had been full of sharp words minutes ago, was now completely still. Loma didn't say much. She didn't need to. Zian stood beside her, like he'd always belonged. He gently took her hand in his, not to show off, but to comfort her. There was no flashy entrance, no drama, just calm power, respect, love. The air in the room changed. Loma looked around, her face calm. She didn't look angry. She looked free, like someone who had finally stopped carrying the weight of trying to be accepted by people who never truly saw her. And now, without raising her voice or throwing any words back at them, she had said everything she needed to say, just by who walked through that door. That one moment said it all. She had never been the burden. She had simply been surrounded by people who didn't know how to value gold when it wasn't loud. The room was frozen. No one moved. Forks hung in the air, food untouched, mouths open. Loma stood quietly beside Zian, who had just walked in and called her darling. But it wasn't just what he said. It was who he was. One of her cousins leaned forward, squinting, and then whispered, "Wait, is that Zian Adewale?" The name travelled across the table like a wave. Heads turned, eyes widened, whispers grew louder. Everyone knew that name. He wasn't just anyone. He was the billionaire tech founder whose face had been all over finance magazines and news shows. A man people only saw on screens, now standing right in their living room. Her sisters looked at each other in disbelief. Her aunt's hand shook as she set down her glass. Her brothers suddenly went quiet, and her mother, she just stared, as if time had stopped. Loma didn't look proud or smug. She wasn't smiling with revenge. She just stood there, calm and still, as if she had been waiting for this moment, not to prove something, but to finally be free from needing to. She looked directly at her mother and said in a quiet but steady voice, "Mom, meet my husband." Then she paused for just a moment and added, "I wanted to see how you'd treat me when you thought I had nothing." The room stayed silent. No one knew what to say. The same people who laughed when she gave a handmade gift were now staring at her like they didn't even know her. But the truth was, they didn't. They never tried. They didn't know her struggles, her dreams, or her strength. They didn't see the nights she cried alone, or the mornings she pushed herself to keep going. They didn't know the real Loma, because they never cared to look. Now, standing beside the man they all respected, they were forced to look at her differently, not because of his money, but because they finally saw what she had become without them. Her mother's lips parted, but no words came out. She looked down, for once unsure of herself, and Loma, she stayed quiet, because her silence was louder than anything she could have said. This wasn't revenge, it was truth, and the truth was simple. She had always been worthy. They just didn't see it until someone else did. 6 years ago, Loma was just a quiet girl with a big dream. She loved to draw, paint, and create beauty with her hands. Art was her world. It made her feel alive, seen, and understood. When she got accepted into a top art school with a full scholarship, she ran home with the letter, heart full of hope. For the first time, she thought her family might be proud, but her mother didn't smile. She didn't even read the whole letter. She looked at Loma with a cold face and said, "No one in this house studies art. It's a useless path." Then, right in front of her, she tore the letter into pieces and dropped it on the floor. Loma stood, frozen. Her dreams were on the floor, torn, like trash. That night, she packed a small bag and left. No goodbye, no tears, just silence. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to go. She stayed in small rooms, shared hostels, and sometimes slept on a friend's couch. She worked in cafes, cleaned floors, painted signs, anything to survive. Life was hard. She often went hungry, felt lonely, and questioned everything. But she never gave up on her art. She painted whenever she could, on paper, old boards, even on walls. Her art became her voice when she had none. One rainy evening, she was at a small art gallery where a friend had let her display 3 of her pieces. She stood in the corner, unnoticed, watching people pass by without stopping. Then one man did. He stood in front of her painting for a long time. He didn't speak, didn't move, just stared. Then he looked around and asked, "Who made this?" Loma stepped forward, shy and unsure. "I did," she whispered. That man was Zian, but he wasn't a billionaire then. He was just someone who saw something beautiful in her work, and in her. They talked that night, not about money or fame, but about colors, life, dreams, and survival. He didn't judge her worn-out shoes or her quiet voice. He just listened. From that day, everything began to change, slowly, gently. He helped her sell a painting, then another. He encouraged her, stood by her, built with her. Their journey started with nothing but belief, in her art and in each other. Those 6 years of silence weren't empty. They were the years Loma grew roots. And when she walked back into her family's home now, she didn't come back the same girl who left. She came back a woman who found her light, far away from the place that tried to dim it. Zian wasn't a billionaire when Loma met him. He didn't have fancy cars or bodyguards. He was just a kind man with a sharp mind and a big vision. What made him different was that he truly saw Loma, not as a burden, not as someone weak, but as someone with powerful talent. He believed in her art when no one else did. After that rainy gallery night, he helped her sell her very first painting. It wasn't for much, but to Loma, it felt like a door opening. Zian didn't stop there. He told her, "If the world can't give you a seat, we'll build our own table." And that's exactly what they did. They started small, just a tiny rented space where Loma displayed her work and painted freely. Zian handled the business side, making connections with local artists, buyers, and writers. Slowly, the small gallery started getting attention. People came not because of big advertisement, but because of the feeling in her paintings, real, raw, and full of hope. Then they opened a second gallery, this time adding space for young artists to create. Zian noticed how so many gifted people couldn't find places to show their work. So he started building something bigger, a tech platform where artists could share, sell, and grow their talents online. He worked late nights, often in silence, with just a laptop and coffee beside him. Loma painted in the next room. Her heart poured into every stroke. They didn't post their lives on social media. They didn't chase fame. They chased purpose, peace, and growth. They built slowly, step by step, without noise. Money came quietly. Recognition came softly. But love and peace, that came first. They promised each other early on, "Let's grow in peace before the world claps." And they kept that promise. Even when they could afford the best of everything, they stayed simple. They kept their circles small and their life calm. What they shared was more than a business. It was healing, a quiet kind of success that didn't need cameras or crowds. Zian made sure Loma never had to fight alone again. He protected her dreams, and in return, she painted a world that gave others hope. Together, they became a team stronger than any storm. They built in the shadows, not because they were hiding, but because they knew the sun rises on those who stay true. And now, as Loma stood beside him in that family dining room, she wasn't just someone's forgotten daughter. She was a woman who had turned pain into purpose, in silence, with love, and with the man who chose to build, not boast. The room was still quiet. Everyone was still trying to process who Zian really was and what Loma had just revealed. Her mother, who always spoke with confidence and control, now looked unsure. Her eyes searched Loma's face, and for the first time in years, her voice didn't sound strong. It trembled. "Why didn't you tell us?" she asked, trying to smile, trying to act like a mother who cared. Loma looked at her calmly and replied, "You never asked." Those 4 words hit harder than any loud argument. Her voice was soft, but it carried the weight of years. Years of being ignored, pushed aside, made to feel like less. And now, the truth was sitting at the table with her, holding her hand, proving she was never the failure they treated her as. Her mother blinked fast, as if holding back tears. Her sisters shifted in their seats. One tried to laugh awkwardly. Another cleared her throat, pretending to check her phone. Her father looked down again. But this time, it wasn't in silence. It was shame. Suddenly, they all began to remember things. Times they had ignored her. Times they had laughed at her dreams. Times they had said, "You're too sensitive," or "We're just trying to help you grow stronger." Now, those words didn't sound like love. They sounded like guilt, hiding behind excuses. We were just strict, her aunt said softly. You know, to prepare you for life. Loma didn't respond to that. She didn't need to. Zian reached under the table and gently held her hand. It was a quiet move, but full of comfort. He didn't need to speak for her. He was just there, steady and sure, reminding her that she wasn't alone anymore. Her mother tried again. You've always been special, Loma. Maybe we didn't say it enough, but we meant well. Loma looked at her mother with tired eyes. She wasn't angry, just done pretending. All those years of silence, of small looks, of words that cut her confidence, none of it could be erased by a few late compliments. She had already learned to live without their approval. She had already built a life that didn't depend on their love. Now her mother's words sounded like cracks in a wall that had once seemed unbreakable. Because deep down, they all knew the truth. They hadn't failed to see her success. They had failed to see her value when she had nothing. And now that she had everything, they were just realizing what they had lost. The room was heavy with silence when Loma stood up and walked over to her father. All eyes followed her, unsure of what she would do next. In her hand was a plain white envelope. She placed it gently in front of him. Her father looked confused at first, then slowly picked it up and opened it. Inside were documents, receipts, approvals, and payment slips, fully paid. Every cost for his kidney treatment covered. He looked up at her, shocked. His lips parted, but no words came out. Her mother leaned over to see what it was. Her sisters frowned in confusion. Loma stood calmly and spoke with quiet strength. I paid for everything, she said. Your hospital bills, the medications, the surgery, it's all done. Her father was still silent, holding the papers in his shaking hands. She continued, her voice steady. Not because you earned it, but because no one deserves to suffer, even if they made me suffer first. The words landed like thunder in the quiet room. She wasn't shouting. She wasn't bitter. She was just telling the truth. The same man who had once looked away when she cried, who let her mother silence her dreams, was now being helped by the very daughter he had overlooked. And Loma wasn't doing it to be praised. She didn't want applause. She didn't even want a thank you. She did it because she needed to let go. She had carried so much pain for so long, and she realized that healing didn't always mean revenge. Sometimes it meant showing the kind of love that was never shown to you, just so you can move forward without carrying their weight anymore. Everyone in the room was quiet. Even her aunt, who always had something to say, stayed still. Her sisters didn't smile. Her mother looked away. No one clapped. No one cheered. But something powerful had just happened. Loma had walked into that room with all their judgment still hanging in the air. But now, she stood above it, not with pride, but with peace. She had nothing to prove and nothing to hold on to. She had already won the moment she chose compassion over anger. She gave that gift not for them, but for herself, to close a chapter, to free her heart, and to show that true strength isn't in how loud you speak, but in how softly you let go. As the evening slowly came to an end, the plates were mostly empty, and the room had gone quiet. No one was laughing anymore. No one was making fun of Loma. They all sat with different thoughts in their heads. The same girl they used to ignore had shown them who she really was. Calm, strong, and kind. Loma stood up quietly. Her chair made a soft sound as it moved back, and everyone looked at her. She looked around the room, not with anger, but with calm eyes. Her voice was gentle as she said, "This was my last family dinner." Her mother blinked. Her sisters looked shocked. One of them opened her mouth, but no words came. Loma didn't wait for a reaction. She turned toward the kitchen and walked over to the cook, a quiet older woman who had worked in the house for years. "Thank you for the food," Loma said kindly. "It was wonderful." Then she walked to the maid, an older woman who used to sneak her bread and fruits when her mother would forget to feed her. Loma wrapped her arms around her and gave her a tight hug. "Thank you for everything," she whispered. The maid looked like she wanted to cry, but she just nodded and held her hands tightly. Loma didn't say goodbye to her mother. She didn't hug her sisters. She didn't need to. She had already said everything without yelling, without pointing fingers. Her silence, her strength, and her kindness had spoken louder than any angry words ever could. Zian stood up and walked beside her. He didn't speak either. He just took her hand and held it firmly. And together, they walked to the door. No one stopped them. No one called out her name. Everyone just watched as Loma walked away, not in anger, but in peace. She wasn't walking out to prove anything. She wasn't seeking revenge. She was simply choosing herself. choosing a life where she didn't have to beg for love, a life where she was seen, heard, and valued. Outside, the night air was cool. The sky was dark, but calm. Loma looked up for a second, took a deep breath, and smiled softly. She didn't cry, she didn't break, because sometimes walking away doesn't mean you're weak. It means you've finally had enough. And in that moment, Loma finally let go of the version of herself that always waited to be loved by the wrong people. She had chosen peace. She had chosen herself. Months after that unforgettable dinner, the world began to whisper Loma's name, not in silence, not in shame, but with awe. A well-known journalist, who had been a silent guest at the dinner that night, wrote an article. It was titled, "The Girl They Called a Burden." The story detailed everything: how she was mocked, how she stayed quiet, how she introduced her husband, and how she walked away with grace. The article went viral. People from all over the world read it. Many cried, many shared it, and many saw themselves in her story. The quiet ones, the forgotten ones, the ones who were always told they weren't enough. Loma didn't hide from the article. She didn't deny a single word. In fact, she printed it out, framed it, and placed it on the wall of her art studio. Right beside it was a painting, one of her most powerful works yet. It showed a woman in dull, grey clothes, surrounded by shadows. But in the center of the painting, the same woman stood tall, now dressed in glowing gold, her head held high, her eyes filled with light. That painting became the backdrop of every interview she gave. Reporters didn't just ask her about her husband anymore. They asked her about her strength, her healing, and her journey. And every time, Loma smiled and answered with honesty. She didn't speak badly about her family. She didn't seek revenge. She simply shared her truth. Then came her new exhibition. The crowd was bigger than ever. Cameras flashed, people clapped, and art lovers gathered to see what Loma had created next. In the center of the gallery, covered in a white cloth, stood her final painting. When she pulled the cloth away, silence filled the room. It was the same gold-painted woman, but now she held a mirror in one hand and a key in the other. The mirror reflected light. The key opened a door behind her, and at the bottom of the painting, in small but bold letters, was the title, "I introduced my worth, not just my husband." The crowd stood still, moved by her message, because her story was never about money or even about revenge. It was about finding your voice, about knowing your worth, and about rising, even when the world expects you to stay quiet. If this story touched your heart, don't scroll past. Share this with someone who needs to remember their worth. Double tap if you've ever been called too sensitive or not enough. Save this as a reminder. You don't need their approval to shine. Tag a friend who's silently building their own masterpiece, because sometimes the quietest ones make the loudest impact. Know your worth. Loma story. Golden rise. Silent strength.